joined us for today's session. By way of going through the program, we'll start off with an address from the Secretary General of the Association of African Universities, and then would have two keynote presentations, one from the Vice Chancellor of the Women's University in Zimbabwe, and then another from Professor Gumode, who is the head of Division of Internationalization at the University of Johannesburg. Then we'll have a high-level panel discussion, which will feature some key people who will be introduced as well. And also featuring prominently on today's agenda, the presentation by two project teams would receive a presentation from colleagues from Afrobarometer, and then another one from APHRC. And then the event will conclude with some remarks from the Director of ICT Communications and Knowledge Management here at the Association of African Universities in the person of Madam Nudumud Lamini. So without further ado, maybe I'll go straight into the program by inviting the Secretary General, Professor Olushola Oyewele, for his welcome remarks. If Prof is ready to join us, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Felicia Kwagbeze. On behalf of the Association of African Universities, I welcome all of us to this 2024 International Women's Day celebration. The message of this year's celebration is invest in women. Let us invest in girl education. It is a strategy for building our joint future. Ladies and gentlemen, let us empower our women to have a great voice in leadership, a great voice in politics. It's a way of accelerating our own progress. Our very important message from AAU today is, let us invest in women in higher education so that we can accelerate progress and development in higher education. Let us empower our women into leadership positions in our various universities, in our various polytechnics. It's a way ensuring that we empower higher education to help our development. Permit me at this particular time to appreciate the women, the increasing number of women who are becoming vice chancellors in the African higher education system. I challenge our current female vice chancellors to ensure that more women move into leadership positions in our various universities. I will not end up this speech without appreciating the great contribution of women to our great progress at the Association of African Universities. Our Director of ICT, Knowledge and Development is Ms. Ndumu Lamini. We appreciate for your great contributions to AAU. Our Human Resource Manager and Administrator for AAU is Ms. Yvette. We are proud of what you are doing in our organization. One of the very successful projects in AAU that we are very proud of is the World Bank supported ACE Impact project. It's being led by another woman, Dr. Sylvia Kwadire. We are very proud of you and what you are doing in the ACE Impact project. Just as you heard before now, our AAU communication is under the leadership of our Senior Communication Officer, Mrs. Felicia Nkrumah Kwagbeze. We are very proud of what you are doing. Ladies and gentlemen, today is the birthday of one of our women in AAU, Mrs. Judu Eglatin. Happy birthday to you. We celebrate you. I celebrate all the women in AAU, and I thank you for your contribution to the development of AAU. Ladies and gentlemen, in this year, 2024 International Women's Day, let us invest in our women. Let's empower women to contribute more to higher education. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prof, for that powerful message, which is really starting the event on a high level and on a high note. Thank you for that and for appreciating all of us. The next item on the program is for us to receive our first keynote address. And this will be done by, as I mentioned earlier, the Vice Chancellor of the Women's University in Africa. And so I would introduce Prof quickly. Prof. Sunungurai Chinangari is a professor of sociology who holds a PhD in sociology. She's a Master of Science in Sociology and Social Anthropology and a BSc Honors in Sociology, also from the University of Zimbabwe. She's the Women's University in Africa's Vice Chancellor since 2021. When she joined the university, she was coming from Zimbabwe Ezekiel Guti University, where she was the Vice Chancellor of the institution as well. Professor also served as the Pro-Vice Chancellor for Zimbabwe Ezekiel Guti University and a lecturer and head of the Sociology Department in the University of Zimbabwe. She is Zimbabwe's representative on the African Vice Chancellors Forum, a member of the International Association of Universities Board representing Africa, and a board of the Center for Zimbabwe Studies at Rhodes University. She's also a board member for the Forum for African Women Educationalists, this is FAWE, and a board member of the Forum for African Women Educationalists Zimbabwe, which is FAWEZI. Prof also serves as a board member of several other institutions, and she's been working really hard in this space. She has won several awards for her outstanding performance as an educationalist, as an administrator, and as someone who is really a strong advocate of women empowerment. We are really happy to have you with us here, Prof. You have the floor. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Felicia, and good day to everyone. I've switched on my video briefly so that members appreciate that they are talking to a human being, but for the sake of connectivity, I will switch off the camera so that I proceed. So I have been asked to give a keynote presentation today as we celebrate the 2024 International Women's Day. The theme that we are focusing on here on this platform is investing in women in African higher education, accelerate progress. I would want to appreciate the organizers of this event, that is the Women in Higher Education Network, the Association of African Universities, and Women's University in Africa. About the absence of an intersectional lens in terms of the data that we have that speaks to the situation of gender and social inclusion in our institutions of higher learning. So in the absence of evidence and data, it becomes then difficult to integrate the concerns of the different stakeholders within our universities or our institutions of higher learning. So what is the problem? If we look at it, you realize that there are quite a number of factors, an interplay of factors contributing to the situation that we have in our higher education institutions, structural factors as well as systemic factors. Issues around gender roles, responsibilities, and also the division of time between reproductive roles, the productive roles, the community management roles that we have as men and women continue to influence access to higher and tertiary education opportunities as students and also as staff members. These also, in a way, also shape the attitudes towards gender equality and social inclusion, including what we as women believe we can and cannot do. They also influence societal expectations around who does what and how, as well as why. The infrastructures that we have as well are also informed by those attitudes. Are they gender responsive? Are they inclusive? The voice and agency issues that I earlier mentioned are also critical when it comes to the spaces that higher education institutions are creating for inclusion and diversity. Issues around gender-based violence and sexual harassment are also quite critical when we are talking about inclusion in higher education institutions and an investment that we need to make in this sector for inclusive development. We can also not avoid talking about framing of gender within the context of in the backlash that has come out of the framing of gender and gender equality. And of course, when we look at that framing, it has also influenced how gender integration has taken place over the years, where gender equality or gender integration has ended at promoting equality of opportunity to education without going further into addressing issues to do with equity, which are quite critical, and without also going further to address the root causes of that inequality in the form of tackling social and gender norms that inform the division of labor, the gender roles, and other stereotypical issues around gender equality. So I'll quickly, in the interest of time, move on to look at what should be the solution to some of the experiences that men and women in our institutions of higher learning have actually experienced. You'll notice I'm talking about men and women from the perspective of inclusion, and also from the perspective that women empowerment cannot exist in isolation from the engagement of men and boys. That's why I'm emphasizing on gender issues as we talk about accelerating women empowerment, and also as we talk about investing in women in higher education in Africa. So to me, the approach to gender integration in our institutions of higher learning should actually focus on addressing the systemic barriers and the critical ingredient being value-based leadership. Without value-based leadership, a leadership that embraces human rights, a human rights-based approach in higher education, we might not go far. What is critical is a shift in mindset to embrace human rights in its totality in our institutions of higher learning. And of course, combine gender equality lenses and gender equity approaches as we integrate gender. To me, this is on top of course, ensuring that we have created equal opportunities for our students, we have created equal opportunities for our staff members, and go further to identifying the unique needs, to identifying the interests and priorities of the different men and women in our institutions of higher learning. Then, of course, design the interventions and strategies responding to these issues. But as I indicated, the most important thing that we need is data to inform decision support. We need to conduct gender audits of our institutions or gender analysis of our institutions to establish the needs, the challenges, the priorities, and the interests of our internal stakeholders, students and staff. And from there, we design gender mainstreaming strategies and action plans that can actually be implemented and monitored for success. So this is a starting point towards investment in women in higher education in Africa. We need to appreciate their needs. We need to appreciate their experiences through research and engagement with them at that level. Then we can come up with strategies to address the environments, the infrastructures that they operate in. Of course, for this to happen, there has to be that political will, evidenced by, for example, a guiding framework for gender integration. Without a guiding framework for gender integration, it becomes a mammoth task to implement strategies that are meant to empower and uplift women in our sector. For example, I would want to make reference to the support that my university received from the International Development Research, which was actually focusing on bridging the gender gap in science at Women's University in Africa. That particular initiative went a long way to addressing some of the gaps that had been identified. So as a university, we had a starting point because we had data available, bringing out the gaps that are there in the university when it comes to gender integration and the empowerment of women in our institution. And from that data, we managed to come up with recommendations that we have already started to implement in the university based on data. So we now have a gender and diversity policy in the university, an anti-sexual harassment policy, a gender and diversity center responsible for internal gender integration as well as external support to external stakeholders. We also have a gender equality committee in the university that is also reporting to Senate at that level on gender issues. And gender is one of the key result areas for our 2023 to 2027 strategy. So we also have a STEM center in the university as a result of the interventions or the observations that actually brought out to the fore issues around lack of participation of girls and women in science. And we are interfacing through this center with high schools to motivate female students to enroll in science subjects. So the political will is not only reflected in policy, but it's also reflected in devoting resources where resources are needed for gender integration and also for women empowerment. So in our university, we have financed the creation of a nursing mothers lounge, which also is meant to address some of the reproductive related responsibilities of our male and female students. But not all activities require funding. So it's important that we identify those low-hanging fruits and begin to implement them for the empowerment of women and girls in our institutions of higher learning. Awareness raising might not require as much. Introducing gender modules for our students might not require finances. So there are some activities that don't necessarily require financing that we can actually integrate to existing activities in our different institutions. It's therefore important that we also invest in gender awareness raising and women empowerment sessions within our institutions of higher learning if we are to be able to embrace gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls in their diversity, of course. So in our institution, for example, we've embraced sign language training for our staff members, and we also introducing the same for our students so that we are inclusive in our approach to empowerment. So that investment is quite critical, and it's also a sign of commitment on the part of the leadership of the institutions of higher learning. Another important point is that since the requirement for most senior academic positions is a PhD, we also need strategies to increase the quantity and, of course, the quality. We can't talk about quantity without also talking about quality. The quality of women in our postgraduate programs. And for this to happen, we need a gender-sensitive funding model, starting with our institutions, where we have funding for postgraduate studies. We also need the funding to have a model that is gender-sensitive. For example, if we look at funding from various development partners to support PhD programs or postgraduate programs in general, there's generally an age limit to access to those resources. So it's quite important that the funding models should look at women's biological clock, as they are more likely to want to have children before pursuing their PhDs, but at the same time, they might also then face challenges after or at that point, because they are beyond the 35 to 40 years threshold or cutoff point that most funding partners would demand for access to those scholarships, including even research funds for publication purposes. So it's quite important that the funding models also respond to the specific and unique needs of women at this level. So there is need to consider factors that go beyond just age, but look at a junior scholar, for example, as somebody who has not published, or as somebody who has not achieved a certain level of academic progress, instead of just focusing on age. We also need mentorship programs for junior academics. Apart from that, the aspect of work-life balance is quite critical, as I've alluded to, the gender roles and responsibilities that affect most of the women from attaining their dreams around in higher education, if I may say. We have also seen policies and infrastructure that is not yet responsive to the needs of women. In some instances, the infrastructure, the physical infrastructure may not be conducive. Yes, we have created opportunities by increasing or by having affirmative action programs in place, but the internal environment might not have been adjusted to suit the diverse population of students and staff that we have attracted through policy. So there is that need to ensure that the infrastructure is also responding to the diverse population that we are attracting through our progressive policies. Leadership programs are also quite critical for mentorship, of course, and also for ensuring that those in leadership do have the capacity to lead and lead effectively. Sometimes when those in leadership fail to deliver, there is a perception that, so this is a difficult position, so this cannot be attempted. So to address some of the stereotypes and attitudes that are then developed as a result of a lack of effectiveness, that leadership training is quite critical. I want to share a brief testimony as I conclude. I found myself as a chairperson of a department. I trained in sociology, as already highlighted, but no one took it upon themselves to build my capacity in administration. So I found myself heading a department. I also found myself a pro-vice chancellor and eventually a vice chancellor. Yet I never trained in those areas. My background is sociology, and there is no leadership initiative that was taken to induct me in how to lead in a university. So my sociology training did not equip me with the necessary skills required for the roles that I had to perform as an administrator. The roles, of course, included human resource management, conflict resolution, budgeting, procurement, and yet no one is taken me through those leadership, if I may say, programs to ensure that I'm well equipped for the task that I should be performing. So I'm saying my training at university in sociology did not expose me to what is required in university leadership. So without a leadership development program in place, it then becomes scary for some people to then get into these positions because one is afraid of the outcome at the end of their tenure or during their tenure. So it's important also that we have these leadership programs. I know the Association of African Universities is a leadership program which is quite important for us to be part of, because it also then comes in to address those gaps. But I think for women, another important platform would be a familiar space amongst women. We need those spaces, safe spaces where we mentor each other, where we take each other through sessions that are unique to women, including confidence building itself. So to me, those are some of the critical issues that we should be reflecting on and coming up with strategies to address as we talk about investing in women in higher education. There is a lot that we can do as women with that investment across the various sectors, because our sectors, when you talk about women empowerment, our sectors then come to influence each other. We cannot talk about empowerment of women at higher education level without talking about empowerment of the girl child at primary and secondary. So a multi-stakeholder approach to this investment is quite critical, including engagement of communities themselves as they shape the attitudes towards women empowerment. So to me, our investment in women should be multi-sectoral, should be multi-stakeholder, and should be integrated, as the challenges that women face in higher education are actually a result of an interplay of factors. So as I end my keynote speech, I want to salute the women of Africa, small and great in our diversities, old and young, for the vigilance, for the resilience that is exuded when we look at the experiences that we have as women. I want to end by saluting all the women of Africa for where we are, for where we are coming from, and for where we are going, because the future is indeed bright. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor, for that powerful presentation. We've been listening very closely and taking notes. A number of things have stood out, for all of us. You did mention the need about the need for all of us to focus on addressing, the key systemic barriers. These are the root causes that is leading to the gender inequality. You focused or mentioned the need for us to promote value-based leadership. You touched on the need for shift in mindset and development of various gender instruments, which would facilitate this process that we are all trying to champion. You also highlighted one key thing, which is the need for the designing of gender-sensitive funding mechanisms, because generally we don't have these available. You also stressed on development of mentorship programs, and generally the need to create safe spaces which would propel women to move up to the best, positions and the best that they can be. I think a number of things have stood out for us, and we really appreciate this presentation. I also want to appreciate all of us participants. We have over 100 of us who have connected from the start of the program till now. And just to also alert you that if you do have any questions, we'll get to a Q&A sessions. But before we get there, you can actually start posting your questions via the chat, and then we would read them for speakers to respond to that. So we'll move on quickly to the next speaker. We have two keynote speakers. We'll move on to the next keynote speaker in the person of Professor Ylva Rodney Gumede, who is the head of Division for Internationalization and a professor in the School of Communication at the University of Johannesburg, South Africa. She is also a senior associate researcher with the Stanhope Center for International Communications Policy Research at the London School of Economics and the senior leader for the university at Universitas. She holds a PhD from the School of Oriental and African Studies, London, as well as an MA degree in politics from the University of Witwatersrand in South Africa. She also holds an MA in journalism from Cardiff University in the UK. She holds a diploma in marketing and business communication from the Institute of International Education in Stockholm. Prof. Rodney Gumede has worked in journalism, marketing, and public relations, and has consulted for several governments, private and academic institutions in Europe and Southern Africa, including the United Nations Development Programme, the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, this is UNESCO, as well as the Swedish National Agency for Higher Education. We are really excited to have you join us here, Prof. You have the floor. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, colleagues. And first, I want to make sure that you can all hear me properly. Can I have a thumbs up from someone or tap tap? I take it that you can hear me then. Fantastic. First and foremost, I want to wish you all a truly happy International Women's Day. And I am truly happy to be with you. And it's a great honor to be able to participate in such an event, and with the many women and colleagues from the Academy that we have with us on this call today. And I am going to try to talk a little bit about some of the female capacity strengthening programs that I am involved with, and particularly through my university, the University of Johannesburg in South Africa, where we have been very clear over the years that one thing that we want to do is to support our academics, and particularly our Black female academics, to ascend through the rankings of the ranks, I should say, of the university. There is much talk about female empowerment and women's empowerment, and I think we need to change the language with which we talk about female empowerment sometimes. Because particularly, and I said this as a women's panel event yesterday as well, in the UK where I'm currently am, that the language that we use can be perceivably quite deceiving. An idea of mentorship for women, for example, can send out the message that we need to be mentored, that we don't already have the capacity that we have to take our careers further or thrive in our portfolios. I think that the idea of strengthening capacity, working together, finding a different language to how we do these things is better, because none of us are a personality, so to speak. We do come into our portfolios, to our jobs, to the academy, with a foundation that just needs to be accelerated in one way or the other. And I think this is exactly the conversation that we're having with the seminar today. So let me take a step back. University of Johannesburg is an interesting institution, full stop. We came about as a merger and was fully merged in 2006 as an institution. And we've grown quite quickly through the merger from about 10,000 students to 50,000 students today. Most of our students are Black African students, and about 85% of our students come from low to middle income households. So we are very appreciative of the transformation process that we need to undergo as an institution. We are just to have a female vice chancellor, but we have a strong deputy female vice chancellor, and I'm proud to say that our leadership is highly transformed in terms of the diversity of South Africa. And I think that's really, really important to emphasize. I'm going to talk a little bit about 3 empowerment programs that we are running through the university. The first program is what we call the Futures Professors Program, where we work with associate professors at our own university, but also other South African universities.
Sorry to interrupt, Prof. I think there's a bit of an issue with the sound. I'm getting notice that people can't hear you properly. Yeah.
All right. I'm going to see if I can. Am I more audible now?
Maybe we'll try again.
Am I more audible now? Can you hear me better now?
Okay, please proceed. We'll manage with that. Thank you.
I will try to speak up as well. Is it distorted? Okay. Let's see. It could be my connection because I'm connecting from a public network as the good enough college where I'm collegely situated. But let's hope. If it gets too bad, let me know and then we will try to do it differently. Let me also try to be as brief as possible so that we can also hand over to the question and answer session. Suffice to say, we have a program called the Futures Professors Program, where we try to empower not only our own professors at the University of Johannesburg, but also female professors in South Africa, to get them from an associate professorship up to a full professorship at our universities. And we do this from a very interesting program that is led by seminars at our institutions in South Africa, but also we host some seminars overseas with our international partners. And this has been a highly successful program. Then we have an internal mentorship program. I will switch off my camera. Thank you. Hopefully that will help. Then we have an internal program that is for our own academics at the university, where we are trying to get them from lectureship into senior lectureship, from senior lectureship to associate professorships, and then up to a full professorship. And I think that's something that's really, really interesting as well. And here we work with our own professors within the university and senior leaders to empower the women that are on this program. And I think that's something that's been highly successful as well. And this is open to all our colleagues in the university, all our female colleagues. We also have a couple of leadership programs that we run with our colleagues through our business school, where we have the empowerment of female executives. And I think this has been highly important as well, because it has taken our female leaders in middle management, and I have several of my own colleagues in the Global Engagement Office enrolled in this program. And it is for the non-academics within the institution to have a chance to also sharpen their leadership and to interact with other female colleagues across the South African higher education landscape and beyond, because we have many partners on the continent as well. And of course, institutions such as the Association of African Universities are very crucial to these kind of partnerships and partnership discussions as well. The last program I want to talk briefly about is our Global Leadership Student Program, where we do the same and try to emulate these programs for our student leadership. And as a university, we have a first-year course that all our first-year students have to do, which we call our African Insights course. It's a course that they do fully on their own. It's an online course module, but it is compulsory for all our first-year students to do this model, to get a better understanding for politics, culture, the languages, and the history of our continent. And that is followed up by a global leadership module that we have developed for our students to give them the leadership skills and what it means to be a leader in our own African context. I should end it there, and I hope that my message came through. And I hope that we can have a discussion and debate some of these things, but also if you want to have more insight into these different models that we have developed to encourage and capacity strengthening for our own female colleagues at the University of Johannesburg and in the broader South African and African higher education landscape, do feel free to ask those questions in the session that follows now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. We had a bit of challenge with the sound, but I think we heard most of the things that you are saying. What we would request maybe from both keynote speakers would be for us to have a brief from what you've shared, then we can share it with participants and they can read through at their free time. But otherwise, it's been a really wonderful session in terms of you sharing what is happening at your university and what is happening, across the continent. It's been quite an insightful presentation. Thank you both. I think I had asked participants that in case they do have questions, they can post it. I'll be checking in soon, maybe immediately after the panel session. So thank you very much. That brings us to the end of this first part, which has focused on the two keynote presentations. We'll move on straight to the next session, which is a high-level panel. And we have a moderator for the session who would really be taking us through moderating the session, be engaging the panelists. There's a high team of panelists who have also been put together. If the technical team can please display the flyer, and then I can speak to the issue. I will be introducing the moderator for this session in the person of Professor Elizabeth Ayu Etan, who is an Associate Professor of Environmental Humanities at the Xavier University of Louisiana. Prof is from Cameroon, and I'm very proud of her because she's one of the founding members of the African Women in Higher Education Network as well. She's part of those who created this network, which is putting together this program today. We are very happy to have you here with us, Prof. And I know it's very early. In fact, for all the speakers, I do know both of the keynote speakers are in the UK because they were there earlier this week for the launch of the Association of African Universities Europe Regional Office. And Prof is also currently on secondment in the US. So she's joining us from there, and I know it's quite early, but thank you very much for joining our session and for moderating today's panel to you. I hand over to you to introduce the panelists, and then you would proceed from there. Thank you very much. Over to you, Prof.
Thank you so much, Felicia. Thank you to the two keynote speakers for the wonderful presentations. I really admire the presentations. We enjoyed it all. We are so excited to celebrate this day with all the women in higher education, including the men who are supporting the women. Thank you so much to be here to listen to the challenges of women in higher education and the possibilities of growing out of those challenges, and also best practices in some of our higher education institutions in Africa. Like Felicia said, we have 4 panelists today who will be talking to us on the challenges of women in higher education in Africa. And the very first on the list is Professor Lilian Atanga. Professor Lilian Atanga is an engaged associate professor dedicated to the research in gender and discurse studies. She is formerly of the University of Bamenda and currently a visiting professor of the Pan-African University of Energy and Water Sciences, Tlemcen, Algeria, and a senior research fellow at the University of Free State, South Africa. She was a Fulbright scholar at the University of Florida. She obtained her PhD in linguistics from Lancaster University, UK. She has researched widely on language, gender politics, and the media in African contexts. She has published on gender discourses in the African context, women's political participation, women in the academy, women and media representations, and recently on women's representation and agency in armed conflict. She has published monographs, edited volume, book, academic articles in high-impact journals and encyclopedias. She authored gender discourses in the Cameroonian parliament in 2010. She also has a book to her credit, Gender and Language in Sub-Saharan Africa, Tradition, Struggle and Change in 2013. She co-edited poetry collection When the Sun Turns Red, Tears from a Land in Despair in 2022, and her most recent article, Blood, Tears, and the Keyboard, Women's Participation in the Southern Cameroon's Conflict in Fonke Machenkeng, Porcupine in a Python's Throat. So Professor Lillian Atanga has actually researched a lot as far as women in higher education is concerned, and most of her publication centers around Cameroon and higher education in Cameroon. So we'll be listening to Professor Lillian Atanga. Professor Lillian Atanga, could we hear you, please?
Thank you very much, Prof. Ayuketan, and the entire organization committee. And this is a very good opportunity for the African Association of African Universities to look into issues of women in higher education. And I'm very pleased with the interventions of the keynote speakers, especially the Vice Chancellor of the Women's University in Zimbabwe. When she was speaking, I told myself she is speaking to all the issues relating to women in higher education in Africa, because it was as if she took my research and was talking about. In 2018, I defended a master's in business administration dissertation with the title Women in University Governance in Cameroon. And I was looking at one university, the University of Bamenda, as a case study. And the results indicated that although at that point in time, there was a high percentage of women in top leadership, 2 out of the 5 members of top leadership were women, which could have been something like 40%. When we looked at other areas, we had just about a maximum of 18% of women in different areas of intervention in the university, especially in leadership positions. From middle management to junior management, and then I looked at women lecturers and professors. And the question was, why is there a scarcity of women in university governance in that university? Also, when we looked at issues of representation in the different departments, looking at students, the same kinds of demographics were visible. And again, referring to the 2 previous keynote speakers, women in science were very limited. Then I took the research further down to question what happens at the junior levels, at the primary level, at the secondary level, at the high school, and the first degree level, that impacts the number of women who then eventually find themselves in higher education. I took the research further in a different article in 2022, which I titled A Gendered Academy. And in that article, I was questioning the academy. And when I say academy, I was looking at university systems, not just the students, but the lecturers and the administration. And the question was, what is happening in the academy that serves as barriers to women's substantive representation, or that serves as a springboard to women's substantive representation? It was no longer just a question of numbers, how many women are where, but what are the women doing there? What impact are these making? Some of the issues that came up were the kind of language. Coming from a linguistic background, one of the key issues was the kind of language that gets used on, about, and around women, not just in the academy, which is the higher education, but from when women are born. How are women represented? What gets said about women? One of the things that really struck me was a woman who said, Prof. Atanga, you are a feminist. Of all these things that we are doing, we must not forget that we are women. We must not forget that our men will always be men and we have to support them. And the question I ask is, what is it in the environment that gets women to think of themselves as second class, even when they are the vice chancellor, even when they are the professor, even when they are the head of department, even when they are the leader? Is there anything, is there something about even us women that we say and do in the academy that disempowers that little girl who is still striving to be where we are? The fact that we have a position of leadership, do we have power in that position of leadership? How does our way of being, our way of saying, and our way of doing impact gender relations in the academy? How does it contribute, for example, to sexual harassment? How does it contribute, for example, to discrimination in appointments in the university? Why is it that, sorry, my alarm. Why is it that even when a woman is better than a man, she doesn't get to get all that a man has? Simple example, a debate is going on. I advance a point. Everyone is silent. People don't even seem to notice what I've said. A male comes and repeats what I said, and he is given all the credit for what he said. So the question we ask is, what happens in the brain, in the processing of information, in the voice you hear, in the mannerisms that surround what I say, in the societal cognition that gives value to the male rather than to the female? And all of this, if we in the academy do not pay attention to issues beyond representation, to issues beyond women's presence, and look deeper at those hindrances, at those barriers which are created at infancy, at our teenage years, that then have impact on us in our later years in the academy, then we will not be solving the problem. I had a conversation 2 days ago with my little girl, and I asked her, Jade, what is it you like about being a girl? And she said, Mama, you should ask me, what is it I don't like that being a girl does not provide to her? So I asked her, what is it that you don't like about being a girl? She said, I hate it when I go to the girls' bathroom and the girls are just girly. Sometimes I get stuck in the bathroom because when I'll be coming out, they say, hey, Jade, why are you not wearing a lipstick? Hey, Jade, why are you dressed in baggy clothes? Hey, Jade. So she is already categorized as a woman, to dress as a woman, to behave as a woman, to act in specific ways. And then she says, I hate it when boys are boys and they think that girls cannot be like boys. I said, what do you mean by that? She said, the boys talk tough and they think I can't talk tough. The boys don't want me to partake in their conversations. They don't want me to play their games. So the question I'm asking us now is, how do we design? Because curriculums are essentially designed by people in higher education. Curriculums for primary education, for secondary education, for university education. How do we design curriculums in such a way that some of these subtle barriers and discriminations get eliminated by the content of what we teach and what students learn? By the way we teach, by the way we act, by how we say and how we do. Because sometimes it is, for example, girls in science. When I was growing up, it wasn't sexy doing S1. It wasn't sexy doing agriculture. It wasn't sexy being a genius in math or physics. Those girls who did math and physics and science and all of those were seen as strong, as we say in Cameroon. They were not soft. They were not delicate. Their way of speaking was different. So all these ways of being and saying and doing differently from the content of learning, how do they impact on women's conception and perception of themselves in their assertion in what they learn and how they navigate the higher education spaces in the way they lead? Do women lead, or are they leading with males behind them dictating the pace of leadership? How do we as leaders assert our voices, assert the way we want things to be heard, to be visible, not just seen? When I say visibility, I mean intellectual visibility. How do we cite women? In your research, are you conscious in the way you reference males and females in your search for literature? Do we search for literature by women in order to promote women? In appointments, do we look at women and how we can promote women? There are many more things in data collection. For example, do we do?
Lillian, we don't have time. I'm so
yes, I'm
sorry. I was
let me
supposed
give
to
my
say
last
that.
word.
I was
Let me
supposed to
give
say
my
that
last
you were
word.
talking for 10 minutes.
Let me give my last word.
Sorry.
Please.
Yes, thank you.
I just want to say that not just women, but women and men need to be conscious in all their endeavors in higher education, in selection processes, in the classroom, in research, and in their communication. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Atanga. We are really grateful for this wonderful contribution. We know you are very particular about women's substantive representation in policy and practices in African higher education, especially when you were in the University of Bamenda. And we don't just want women's numerical representation in middle level positions. We want women's voices to be heard. And we also want women to, start looking at masculinity differently, start, educating our male children. By the time they get to higher education, they will also understand the stakes that it has between the different genders. And so we appreciate that, and we are happy about your presentation. Thank you so much, Professor Atanga. Thank you for that insightful presentation. I want to say that We are supposed to speak for 10 minutes, and we will have the question and answer session. So our next speaker on the line is Professor Angela Akoso. Professor Angela, if you're there, Professor Angela is an associate professor and the dean of the School of Development Studies. She holds a PhD from the University of Manchester in the UK. She has been engaged in postgraduate research supervision and outreach activities involving gender and labor relations for over 20 years. Professor Akoso's scholarly research covers gender employment and women's work. She has served as the research coordinator at the University of Cape Coast Center for Research, Advocacy and Documentation. Gender and development are among her enduring interests. Professor Akoso, if I pronounce your name correctly, thank you so much to be here with us, and the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Liz, for the kind introduction. And thank you, Felicia, and your AAU team for having me on the panel. For the sake of connectivity, I'll just introduce myself and then put off my camera. Yeah, so one way to invest in women and to accelerate progress is to invest in women in higher education. That is why this panel is very, very important on a day like this when we are celebrating all women. And I'd like to take the opportunity to celebrate all women online today with us and all women in higher institutions of learning on the continent. The keynote speakers have highlighted much of the challenges that we all have in mind to speak on. And rightly so, we do not want to repeat all those challenges. But I want to just mention that the challenges kind of exist in a continuum, almost progressive from quantitative to qualitative. So in the first keynote, for instance, we heard that there are leakages that occur with regard to numbers, the number of students that enroll into higher institutions of learning, and at postgraduate level, they reduce. And then when it comes to entry into the academy, we see fewer and fewer women. Once the women also enter into the academy, then we go into the qualitative problems that have also been highlighted at large by the keynote speakers. So I do not want to emphasize those points again. I want to, at this point, raise issues about the challenges of the gender interventions that have been put in place in many of the institutions of higher learning that I'm familiar with, and what can be done to address those challenges so that we can accelerate progress when it comes to women in higher education. So first, I want to touch on the issue of gender centers. Now, we see more and more gender centers being set up in institutions of higher learning. And this is a really good step in the right direction. But these centers have a purpose. Their purpose is to accelerate and see to it that gendered issues on these institutions of higher learning are addressed so that women are protected and their growth is accelerated. But what do we see? We see that these centers are confronted with a number of problems so that they are not able to function as well as they should. An example is when it comes to the appointment of directors or heads of these centers. They are left to the whims and caprices of the institutional leaders, and they decide who to put there, whether or not the person has the right gender politics, understand women's issues or not. And more, you see that the aims and objectives of the center get lost in the way. We also have issues around gender budgeting. Many of the institutions of higher learning fail to allocate enough resources to the interventions around gender issues. So more and more is becoming an issue of having gender center for the sake of it. We want to ensure that the gender centers function and serve the purpose for they have. Then we have to take care of who are appointed to lead these centers and the budgetary allocations that are assigned to their running. I'll move to the issue of mentorship. Mentorship programs exist in most universities, but they are not effective. I remember when I was recruited at the age of 29, I was assigned a mentor, a male mentor, who was quantitative bias and I was qualitative bias, who was in a different subject area and so on and so forth. As a young faculty, I wasn't getting direction when it came to my research work. I had to find my own mentor. I had to find a woman mentor that I could relate with, that could guide me. And so we want our mentorship programs to be structured if we want to invest in academics and to ensure that we accelerate their progress. We have to make sure that we take a second look at the mentorship programs, especially those targeted at young women faculty that join the university. And I think the keynote speaker, the first keynote speaker, alluded to this in her presentation. And my third point will be on sexual harassment. I think most universities now have sexual harassment policies in place. They have gender policies in place. But when it comes to the implementation of these policies, there is still so much to be done. And it is this area, this issue of sexual harassment, that is also causing much of the leakages when we come to how many women remain in the academy. The issues of power relations are often minimized. And this is very critical. The nature of sexual harassment on university campuses is critically an issue of power and not an issue of sexuality. And until we confront that and cross out entirely the element of consent in such cases, we will not be making headway. And our women are not going to progress. They are going to quit and we will be making no progress at all. When it comes to sexual harassment, we are still grappling with the issue of dress code and slut shaming, which is also reducing the number of women who are reporting their experiences. Because when you report, you are criticized, you are blamed, and the perpetrator is left loose. Because of that, it's either your bad dressing that is provocative and so on and so forth. And so we also need to confront this issue so that the policies we have in place can be useful. We have a sexual harassment committee, and we are also struggling who are put on the sexual harassment committee and whether lawyers should be there to defend the accused and so on and so forth. And all this is the presence of lawyers and all that is turning the committee almost ineffective and making it difficult for young faculty and students to get redress from the committee. Sure. And it is one challenge we want to look at. Then finally, another intervention that needs a second look at is the counseling support for women. Mental health issues and psychological support are not given good attention when it comes to the counseling support. We have a counseling unit that is very much interested in counseling students, but not faculty. Much of our colleagues, many of our colleagues actually are sandwich persons, just like me. We are nursing children, nursing aged parents, nursing siblings and husbands and so on. And we are in the middle, sandwiched. There are colleagues who are handling autistic children, children with developmental problems, and nobody hears their stories. We are expected to deliver like anybody else. There's need for additional institutional support, emotional and psychological support for not only women, of course, but especially women who are caregivers, so that they can also function. Because granted, these really do get in the way of how much we can deliver in terms of our research and our work and our progression in the academy. So these are some of the problems I wanted to highlight, particularly with respect to the gendered interventions that we have that are not working too effectively. I want to conclude my part by raising some recommendations And the first one is that since the challenges are widespread, they should not be left to individual institutions to tackle. Some broad action plans are required. So institutions like AAU and governments need to provide a coordinated effort to push the gender question down the throat of all institutions of higher learning. By this, I mean they should not be left to the whims of the institutional leaders, most of whom are men. And asking female vice chancellors to ensure that women issues are addressed will be asking too much of them because they are operating within a patriarchal system. Our institutions of higher learning are gendered institutions, and these women vice chancellors themselves are having a lot of issues to confront with. And so we need a coordinated effort to support them. Secondly, we need data. So if the institutions are made to conduct gender auditing on annual basis, then AAU and institutions like that can also collate these data, and then we can have a good picture of the situation, which will drive us to targeted interventions to support all universities that are members of such associations. And at the institutional level, there's the need for policy review from time to time. And this, I guess, is done. So gender and sexual harassment policies, there is need for affirmative action when it comes to setting up committees and boards and so on. And this must be backed by policy. When affirmative action is not backed by policy, it leads to tokenism and then defeats the purpose. I would also want to emphasize that there are a number of women's groups on university campuses, and these groups need support because empowerment is not bestowed. Empowerment is intrinsic. It starts from the individual woman, then who seeks collective action. So when women come together and form groups, already they are displaying some level of agency. And it's a good starting point to support these associations and groups on campuses so that they can have a transformative effect when it comes to how much they can achieve once they have the institutional backing. Finally, I want to just say that the challenges of women in higher education are only a reflection of those of the wider society within which these institutions are located. So institutions of higher learning are gendered institutions, and they are driven by patriarchy. So the patriarchal influences also then determine the institutional gender cultures that drive us. And this is where we need to tackle. And this is where we need our men. This is where we need the change in mindset that has been alluded to by the first keynote speaker. So I think on this note, I want to save time for Liz, and I will stop here and get ready for questions that may come. Thank you all for listening to me.